Is Russia bringing back a disgraced commander? Is it a sign that they're running out of people even able to run this war? And are Russian politics getting even weirder? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's April 16th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the control map, and the biggest news is no news, right? There are only minor frontline updates. The only one I could see is right here. Just, again, an adjustment as to who's controlling this building outside the rail yard. It previously was assessed as being under Ukrainian control. It's now assessed as being under Russian control. But again, even in the scheme of Bakhmut itself, it's considered very, very minor and probably is just a correction. You can see here just 60 Russian offensive actions on the Eastern Front over the last 24 hours, focused as always on Avdiivka and Bakhmut. Not a lot of creativity being shown on the Russian side. And I think the Russians are starting to become aware of it because according to the UK's Ministry of Defense, General Colonel Mikhail Teplinsky is the former commander of Russia's elite VDV airborne troops, and he's likely returned to a major role in Ukraine. He was booted out in January of this year, but he's one of the few Russian generals, says, who is actually respected by the rank and file, and probably his turbulent career actually is indicative of that because it shows that he is willing to go against the Russian general staff, whose reputation has been just absolutely getting crushed on all sides by mill bloggers, by Prigozhin, the Wagner chief. Just about everybody has a bone to pick with the Russian general staff. So being on their bad side is probably seen as actually a plus by rank and file Russian troops. They think that he's unlikely to just be in charge of VDV units, but he's likely to promote the VDV, the Airborne Corps' traditional role as an elite force. And we've seen, as we talked about, that the VDV is running the fight on the northern and southern flanks of Bakhmut, probably stabilizing these lines as Wagner troops push in and block by block try to seize the city. It also talks in vague terms, but this is, again, an interesting insight into the UK's intelligence gathering apparatus. They have likely undertaken novel integration with thermobaric rocket launchers in Crimea, which is sort of interesting. This may be alluding to the assault detachment concept. As you guys know, right, we talked about this in an earlier video where you have this military table of organization where a unit is formed in order to conduct these direct ground assaults. And intrinsic to them is having integrated what they call flamethrower units. And though in practice, they're units that are responsible for operating their thermobaric rocket launchers. And so it's interesting to see that maybe they're experimenting with new versions of this assault detachment specifically for airborne troops outside Crimea. As we've seen, again, Russia, the need to get creative is significant. But where things get really weird and creative is in Russian domestic politics. So Prigozhin, of course, a lot of people are saying that he called for Russia to end its war against Ukraine. But as ISW points out, that translating Russian to English is hard when the language is straightforward. And Prigozhin does not speak in a straightforward way. Prigozhin has an idiosyncratic rhetorical and writing style that relies heavily on deadpan sarcasm, selective ambiguity, aphorisms, vulgarity, and ironic slang. Prigozhin's isolated quotes separated from the context of his messages often lose their initial meaning. And I'm sure we all know people that speak like this. I'm trying to think if there's a U.S. politician that operates this way. There really isn't. Politicians generally, unlike Prigozhin, U.S. politicians have communications teams that deliberately pull out all the things that he actually relies on to communicate. I would expect that this is actually probably a way of communicating in the U.S. may be common among like individuals engaged in a criminal enterprise because they are, The selective ambiguity is a classic way that if you're being wiretapped, you don't accidentally disclose explicitly something that will get you convicted. Aphorisms to hide what you're really doing. Vulgarity, because people who would trust some nerd who talks like a politician. And ironic slang is just fun to use. I don't know what else to tell you. And is really common in some cultures, right? Think of like if you look at Brazilian MMA fighters, they often have nicknames that are exaggerations of their opposite traits. So you will call someone I don't know. You'll call someone a diminutive form of their name if they're like a heavyweight. You see that quite a bit. So you end up with ironic slang. I think also Jamaican culture, it's very common for like a shy person to be called like loudmouth or something, where you're called loudmouth and it's implied that everyone knows that you're really shy. So I think all of this sort of stuff reflects some of his background as a former prisoner and as a quasi-legal businessman for many years. So it makes it really hard to translate what he's saying. But where things get even weirder is that the Russian information space, apparently Russia's a state-run media outlet, RBC, said that a study published by the Russian New Economic Association found that an increase in the number of migrants to 1.1 million would help stabilize Russia's population, which is in decline due to domestic fertility levels, low life expectancy, and population outflows. This is actually a common problem in the entire Western world. Without turning this into a different video, net migration is basically as your population ages and does not get replaced with young offspring, you run the risk that you're going to have a bunch of old people who are drawing not just pensions, but also drawing on the economic resources of the country, despite being too old to contribute to it. Think your 90-year-old, grandma in a nursing home, right? She's being cared for by people, but she herself is not contributing economically, right? That was what she did in the initial many years of her life. In order to solve this aging population problem, where more people need care than there are caregivers or to provide it, and there's more people drawing on pensions than there are people contributing to the pensions, you need a net migration to fill that gap of young workers. In the U.S., we, at the end of the day, regardless of your stance on migration, that is the system that we use. We could fairly easily create an environment where there's no incentive for migrants to cross from South and Central America, but we don't, because we need this many workers annually to stabilize population outflows. We need actually more than that. But that's true also in almost every Western European country. Of course, this brings up some problems because so much of the ruling party ideology is based around what's sometimes referred to as Russian chauvinism, or this idea that ethnic Russians have an inherent superiority and an entitlement to the ruling positions in Russia, which it's worth noting that Russia has a lot of different ethnic groups. And so the irony, of course, that some of these politicians, let's see if we can find them, some of these politicians actually discuss that they fear migration from Central Asia, uncontrolled migration from Central Asia, which some claim will bring violence and extremism to Russia at a great social and economic cost. Again, these are some pretty well-trodden talking points if you're from Western Europe or the U.S. Our politicians of various stripes have been portending the end of everything, saying these exact things. And the irony, the even greater irony, is there's already a massive Central Asian contingent who are indigenous to Russia. Right? Russia has a huge number. We've seen them make videos on the front lines. They're, ethnically, again, Central Asian, Mongolian. They speak often Yakut or other Central Asian languages as a primary language. So this idea that these people who've been in Russia for literally since before recorded history somehow would be foreign interlopers is actually pretty insane and comical. But of course, Russia's got to somehow thread this needle, and you see some politicians already doing it, right? They're trying to say, oh, well, we want pro-Russian refugees who left Ukraine for Russia. We want to bring in ethnic Russians from all over the world to save them from Russophobia abroad. This is just the politicians doing their, what's the word I want? Mental gymnastics, right? In order to be ultra nationalist, but recognize that one, you have ethnic minority populations, you need more ethnic minority populations. So, but you want to make it sound like you're trying not to. And if you look at any right-wing politician in the United States who is strongly aligned with business interests, you'll see them try to work the same thing where they're anti-immigration, but they also realize that the reality is that we need a significant number of immigrants to sustain our economy. Madness. Even more madness, Russian President Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party is going to recruit Russian military personnel who've served in Ukraine as candidates for elections in 2023 and 2024 to establish itself as the pro-war party in Russia. Which I guess that's a technique. I mean, yeah, if you want to support the military, you got to vote for the veterans. And when you don't have a free state, or free elections, one party can absolutely make it their policy. Anyway, guys, thanks as always for joining me. If you want access to support me, support what I do, support my coverage, which it gets harder every video, go to combatvetnews.com. This is my website. You can see I provide daily news updates on Ukraine. All my YouTube videos are here. Plus, you can become a member. It's actually less expensive than the Patreon because the Patreon, well, I had to shut it down because they kicked me off. And it gets access to exclusive members-only content. These are all the viral combat videos that you've seen. I break them down, and we get insights into the fighting on the ground with GoPro footage, drone footage that you just can't get anywhere else. Plus, I'm uploading all my old Patreon archives, so even better. Anyway, be sure to check it out. Thanks as always, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.